Perik in Makos Daf actually introduces some ideas which are a little bit outside of the general subject. We get involved in a little bit in Kotchim. It's just like a warm-up. We get involved a little bit in Trumas and Maestris and so on. In a nutshell, the beginning of this Perik, we talked about Eilein Aloikin, the following at Malchus. And we only cited examples of Averis that if you did it, deliberately, you get kares. B'shegeg, you bring a carbon, and you get malchus for it. So we said in the beginning of the Gemara, there are three opinions. According to Rabbi Akiva, you get malchus for kares, but you won't get malchus for an avera that the penalty is death in a bezdin. For example, if someone, was machal Shabbos, you won't get malchus for that. Rabbi Shmuel holds you get malchus whether it's for an avera of kares or whether it's an avera of Mrs. Bezin, you will get malchus. And then we had Rabbi Yitzchak who says that you don't get malchus for kares, you don't get malchus for Mrs. Bezin, nor do you get malchus for kares. These are the three opinions we had, starting off Eilein Aloikin, the following you get malchus. Just to digress for a minute, there's a fourth opinion which we'll have in Daf Chav Gimel, which is Reb Chanina ben Gamliel. Reb Chanina ben Gamliel is of view that when it comes to kares, you get malchus, and that supplants the kares. In other words, you won't get kares anymore. Rabbi Akiva said you get malchus, and hopefully you'll do tshuva. If you do tshuva, then you don't get kares. You don't do tshuva, you will get kares. Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel says that the malchus itself is in the place of tshuva. So what happened many years ago? There was the Inquisition, and there were a number of Jews who couldn't face the horror of leaving all their possessions behind and leaving penniless. So they remained behind, and the Goyim obviously knew that, and they would force these Yidden to not only desecrate the Shabbos, but to eat on Yom Kippur, to eat chametz on Pesach. They made sure that they eaten these closet Yidden, the Moranos, were being mechal, were doing every aver possible. And eventually, when they managed to escape and survive, many of them felt that there was no point in becoming religious and doing mitzvahs. They did so many averas, and the very severe ones, like eating on Yom Kippur or eating chametz on Pesach, they abandoned hope of ever being considered a Yid, and they became totally non-religious. That time in Sfas, Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, who was the Rabbi Yaakov, who was the he was the head rabbi at Sfas. At that time was Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Bes Yosef, the Alshich, the Mabit, all these great luminaries, the Arizal, and they were all there in Sfas. So he decided that he was going to Mari Beirav. Mari Beirav. He decided that he was going to set up a bezin and invite all these people from around the world, the Moranos, and relying on the view of Reb Chanina ben Gamliel, that if you receive malchus, you no longer will get kares. So he invited them all to come to Eretz Yisrael, to his bezin, confess on the sins that they did, like eating on Yom Kippur, better yet if they bring witnesses, and then they'll get malchus, and as a result, they will no longer receive kares, so they'll be totally vindicated, or all their averes will be expunged, and they can once again start anew, start afresh. And in order to do that, a bezin to administer these punishments, you need to be, we need to receive smicha going back to Moshe Rabbeinu. So he relied on a Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos, and in the Rambam itself, it's a little bit not so clear. But if all the rabbis or Yidden Eretz Yisrael confer a status of a Sanhedrin on these people, it's tantamount to Moshe Rabbeinu giving them smicha, as if they just reconnected that link, and they can start giving smicha again. He relied on that. And since most of the rabbis at that time lived in Sfas, and most of them were his students, obviously they all agreed. He gave smicha to Rabbi Yosef Cairo, he gave smicha to the Alshich, I think he gave smicha to Arizal, he gave smicha to a number of people. And they sat down and they convened this bezin. At the same time, there was a rabbi in Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim then was quite desolate, and there was not the Roy Minyan of Bin Eden, but he was offended that they didn't even consult him. And he's argued that the Rambam says that you need the majority of the rabbi, you need all the rabbis in Israel, it should be from him as well. And then furthermore, he stated, that bezin should be seated in Yerushalayim. Anyway, a big fight erupted, and it became very, very personal. So this went on for a number of years. It became very, very personal, and finally the Mari Berav got so angry with him. This was the Ein Yaakov's son, Maram Nechav. He got so angry with him that he sent him in his Chuvas Malbach. He writes that you, Rabbi Yerushalayim, you were a Marano as well. You ate treif, you ate on Yom Kippur, and you ate chazer, and you ate chametz on Pesach. How dare you argue with me? That's what he wrote to him. I guess he was exasperated. And he wrote back to him, at least I went out and did tshuva. If you would have been in my shoes, you'd still be sitting there and eating treif and doing all those averas. So don't you dare talk to me. Anyway, that's how personal it got. But because of that fight, and because it became so personal, it was disbanded. That whole bezin was disbanded. But all that was based on the view of Chanina ben Gamliel, not the three opinions we had in the beginning of the parak, but at the end of the parak, he says that Malchus takes the place of Karas. But right now, where are you up to? Anybody knows where you're up to exactly? Are you up to today's daf is daf Yudches? Are you up to the fourth line to the top, Gufa, or you stop before them? Anybody knows?
Yeah, we're up to the. Wait a second here.
A Gufa goes back to address what Rava said.
Oh, just a second.
Unless you still stopped in the middle of the sugya.
We were in the middle. We were on at the bottom of
Yud Zayin on the base?
Yud Zayin Amud base at the very bottom.
So let's stop there.
We were at the Chamisha Isur and Havu.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so bottom line is we brought down that this Rab Shimon, who Rab Shimon basically said that even though there's an avera, there's a what do you call it, a mitzvah asay, you're over a mitzvah asay for doing a number of different averas like the kurim, eating before you called it a name or before you placed it before the mizbeach, a carbon eating before they sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach, or eating it outside of the walls of Yerushalayim, or kachim eating it outside the walls of the Beis Hamikdash itself, or a carbon that let's say an oil that anybody eats even after the sprinkling of the blood. So Rav Shimon says there, and Rava came along and said, as wonderful as Rav Shimon is, as wonderful as it is, and every mother should pray that they should have a child like Rav Shimon Yochai, but nevertheless, it's all wrong. It's all wrong. And so the Gemara asked the question. So the last question we asked is, how can Rav Shimon learn out all of these things with Kal V'Chaimer? He says it can't be that the Torah is addressing this and this thing because eating outside of a wall. I have a Kal V'Chaimer from Meiser. If Meiser, which is so kal, you're not allowed to eat outside the walls of Shalayim. Surely, these things you're not allowed to eat. Bekur you're not allowed to eat outside the walls of Shalayim, and so on. But l'chayda we have a rule that you cannot punish, or you cannot at least be mazhirim in adin. We said that even those that say that you could punish from a Kal V'Chaimer, but when it comes to a warning in the Torah has to explicitly give us a warning. You cannot use a Kal V'Chaimer for many reasons. But one of the reasons is, as the Marshal says in Sanhedrin of Samachay, every Kal V'Chaimer is based on logic. Well, every logic has like an anti-logic. Somebody smarter than you can disprove whatever you did. The famous example I give. How you know you're allowed to steal? How you know? Very simple. Madach in my own pocket. You cannot put your hand in my pocket and take what you want, but I could. So surely in your pocket, where you're allowed to place your hand, surely I can place my hand there as well and take whatever I want. That's the idea of Kal V'Chaimer. Obviously, it's refutable. Obviously, it doesn't make sense. But the point is that every logic has another logic that's counter it. So how can you make a warning and a law out of a Kal V'Chaimer? Maybe somebody smart will come along and undermine the entire Kal V'Chaimer. So Gemara wants to know, how can you get 5 Malkusim? How can you be 5 Malkusim? Says the Gemara. The Gemara says, we're not talking about Malkus, we're talking about Isurim. The 5, in addition to the Oiver and Aseh, you're also Oiver Loisaseh, but there's no Malkus involved. Says the Gemara, but the Rava clearly said that you get Loike. So the Gemara says he meant Isurim. So now the Gemara asks a question what our Mishnah said. Well, not now. We learned clearly, our Mishnah, Elu Heina Loike, It says clearly in our Mishnah the following: get Malkus, and it includes, for example, Bikurim before you said the psukim that you meant to say. And the same thing it includes the Mishnah if you ate the kachim outside of the base of Mikdash. So what does he close from here? It says Eileen Aleikin, you get Malkus. And yet, how do we learn those out that there's a lav? Because the Torah only says in say from this whole pasuk of Rav Shimon, all these kal v'chaimis. No, how can that be? Says the Gemara, you're right. We're not learning from kal v'chaimis. The Gemara says we're learning more now according to Rashi. Other Rishonim, like cases, not learn differently. Elakra Yiseidu. He's not learning kal v'chaimis. The entire pasuk is redundant. What do you mean? Mechdik. See, first an introduction to this entire concept of Ma'aser Sheni. It says in the pasuk the following: "V'havei shama." You should bring there, and then the Torah itemizes each thing. You should bring there your oilus, you should bring there your kabbanas, you should bring there your maises, your trumas yetchem, nidrechem, nidvasechem, pchoides, every single thing is mentioned there, and it says bring it there. Okay, and all the Torah had to then say was the Torah should have just said, and don't eat. No, don't eat them outside the wall of Yerushalayim, because it says that you should eat it only in front of in Sharech, in Yerushalayim. That's it. Why did the Torah in that pasuk where it says again reiterate every single one of those items? The pasuk is extra. It must be to come to teach you something new. Why is the Torah repeated again? You know what's coming again? To tell you that each one has a separate lav. The separate, not only, in other words, it's not only coming to teach you that you're not allowed to eat outside the wall, because then all the Torah had to do was say, you cannot eat it, based on the pasuk before we already itemized all the items, all the different kabbanas and everything else, and just say, you can't eat it in your getting, and that's it. We would know that none of them you're allowed to take out of Yerushalayim or the Beis Mikdash, of Yerushalayim. But because the Torah says again, and it goes through every single one, it's coming to teach you something else. And we're saying, what does it come to teach you? So we're saying, come to teach you all those things we learned before. Obviously, it's not coming to tell you don't eat it outside the wall, because we already know. And it's not, you can argue the reason why the Torah has repeated it, because otherwise it'd be a lav shebechlolos. A lav shebechlolos is when you have one lav that includes many averis. So Rashi lays down a very important rule. When is a lav shebechlolos? For example, the Torah says that you should not eat it, you should eat it roast. Right, the Torah says you should not eat it, but only roast. But it includes semi-cooked, fully cooked, half raw. So because it includes a number of things, there's no malchus. That's what lav shebechlolos. But over here, where the Torah spells out each one separately, and it says loy on all of those, that's called a separate lav for each one. So therefore, now that the Torah repeats the entire pasuk, it's not obviously it's not coming to tell you don't eat it outside the shlaim. It could have just said what do you need the rest of the pasuk for? So each one's coming to teach you something else. So we say, for example, Bikurim. What does the Bikurim come to add? To tell you that if you did not read the psukim yet, according to Rav Shimon, or according to others, if you did not place it in front of the Mizbeach, it's the kohen cannot eat from it yet because it's still you haven't done the matzah, you haven't done the thing which allows the kohen to eat from that Bikurim. And then the other ones that I mentioned is the same thing. Why don't we say that in all the kachim, we learned, remember the first kachim we learned, we said is that you're not allowed to eat it before you sprinkle the blood. So why don't we say that only that halacha is what teaches us regarding chatzavashim, regarding b'choir, regarding oile. How do you know to learn different dinim for each one? And Rashi therefore concludes, and this is Rashi Pshat, where Taisus agrees. You're right. The others ones, the extra things that we learn about, outside the base of Midrash, although there's a lav, but there's no malchus in that. Because that's purely from a kal v'chaimer. We don't give malchus from a kal v'chaimer. What we do learn from the pasuk is that you're not allowed to eat any of these things before you sprinkle the blood, and for that, you will get malchus. So, back to the Gemara Gufa, let's analyze what Rava said. Rava said before that a zar, if a Yisrael, she'achal mina oila, ate from a carbon oil which meant to be completely consecrated on the base of the Mizbech. Lifnei zrika, before you sprinkle the blood. So if a zar ate from an oil before you sprinkle the blood, outside of the wall of Yerushalayim, the Rav Shimon Leika Chamish. You get 5 different averis. First of all, you're a Yisrael, you're a zar, you're a Yisrael. Second of all, you ate a carbon oil, which is not meant to be eaten. Third of all, you ate it before you sprinkled the blood. Fourth of all, it was outside the walls of the Shalim. And fifth of all, it's outside the walls of the Beis Hamikdash. Because it's a kotche. You get 5 malchus. Says the Gemara, and according to Rashi, it doesn't really mean you get 5 malchus. Some of them you get malchus, some of them are just an issa. Gemara now is going to ask, there are a number of other Yisudim that we could have included. Says the Gemara, why don't we also include Mishum Bezor, La Yochal Kodesh, Ki Kodesh Haim. It talks about the Maluyim. It says over there that a Zor, it says that only those that will help atone the person who brought them up we should eat them. And a Nazar should not eat them Ki Kodesh Haim, because they are Kodesh. And so here you have another law. If you ate from carbon oila, you also violated this pasuk bizarre lo yochel ki anything kodesh, and this is kachim. So the Gemara, the first half of that pasuk is who should eat it? A kohen who will help atone the person who brought it. So only a carbon that could have been eaten by a kohen, and you come along and you a zar eat from it, you get punished, you get malchus. But if it was never suitable for a kohen to eat either, because it's a carbon oila, then this pasuk doesn't apply. Says where it's suitable for kohenim. Also not suitable. Says the Gemara, the Lilkin Nami wanted to give malchus also mishum ubasa basada treifa loisachel. It says in the pasuk, and basar flesh or meat basada out in the field, the treifa you shouldn't eat. And it says already once in the pasuk before that you're not allowed to eat. Why does it say again ubasar basada treifa? What do you need that for? It's extra. So we dashen. What do we know about a field? That it has no walls. So things which you have to eat it's in a confined area that has walls, and you took it out of those walls, you are also. So for example, you took a carbon outside the wall of Beis Hamikdash, or you took a kachim kalim outside the wall of Shleim, or Ben Pakua that stuck his hand out, you were shechting the mother, and the baby in the mother's womb stuck its foot out, or its foreleg out from the animal, that foreleg is no longer included because it went out, went outside of the mechitzas, you're not allowed to eat it. So why don't we say that if you ate a carbon oil outside of Yerushalayim, you also violated that particular Veda? Says the Gemara, you know why? Again, when do we say that if you take it out, the sod is treif? That means it's only here it's treif, but inside it was kosher. But because you took it outside of its confines, you made it treif. But hacha by carbon oil, even inside you are not permitted to eat from it. If you're not permitted to eat from it. Therefore, it doesn't apply. This aveda doesn't apply there. Okay, says he went further. The nilkinami karabeleza. Why don't we get also malchus like Rabbi Lezer says? Rabbi Lezer says, lo yochel. It says regarding noise, leftover of a carbon. So it says the leftover carbon you're not allowed to eat. Instead, lo ye'achel, you shouldn't eat it. Ki kodesh hen. But the reason that the Torah gives why you shouldn't eat it because it's kodesh, which means that any kodesh which is pasul, you're not allowed to eat. Kol shebekodesh pasul. Bo hakosav litin loises al chalos. The Torah says that if you eat an animal which is pasul, you get an aveda because there's lo yachol. So l'chayda, if you ate this carbon oil, which before you sprinkle the blood, you took it out of the walls of Shleim, it's a psul in the animal. You should get this additional malchus. Says more again. Hani mili with only if this is what makes a pasul. Heicha the koydem pesulei chazi. For this particular psul, let's say taking it outside the walls of the Shleim, or before it became nice, it was a kosher animal, and because you left it over, you can't eat from it. Okay, then you'll be over the aver loyachol. The koydem psul nami lechazi, but hach over here, even before it went outside the walls, it was a carbon oila. You're not allowed to eat from it. So therefore, there's no malchus for that particular aveda. Fine. Let's skip malchus because there's another aveda perhaps from Rabbi Lezer. Tanya, we learned Rabbi Lezer says koshu bekolotia. It talks about carbon mincha, but any carbon that has to be completely burnt on the mizbeach, any carbon that has to be completely burnt on the mizbeach, if you eat it, you'll be not only over all of these things you're over aveda say, but you eat it, you also have an additional uleisasa. You have to get the aver for eating it. So why aren't you over this if you ate carbon oil before you sprinkle the blood, and the carbon oil has to be burnt on the mizbeach? You should be over that. You should be over this achila. But right, you will be over. So how come Rava doesn't include that? The Rava Mahai Krok Omar. Rava was talking about only from this very pasuk. From the pasuk, he's telling you how many avedas you'll be over from the original pasuk that Shimon brought down. Lo suchel lechel b'sharecha. So Rab Shimon said you have all of these different isurim, and he's showing that how you could be over all these isurim, you'll be over 5 avedas. But possibly you'll be over other avedas as well. But that's not what he was focused was. His focus was on the pasuk of Rab Shimon. So therefore, you will be over the avedas. It's more than 5. Back to Gemara. Omar Rav Gidl, Omar Koyin she'ochal mechatas v'osham lifnei zika. We had before Rav Shimon said one of the things we learn out is that a korban chatas or korban osham, if you ate it before you sprinkled the blood, you get malchus, whether you're kohen or whether you're Yisrael. L'chayda my time. Now the trader says you have to eat it after you spray the blood. Now you tell me I'm mostly getting a lab for eating it beforehand. My time. What's the reason? Because Amakra. It says in the pasuk, "Va'achlu oisam asher kupa behem." Who should eat it? Only those that gave a kapara, which means eat it after you sprinkle the blood. That's when you do the kapara. Va'acha kapara in. You can only eat it after you sprinkle the blood. So we dashen, we can infer, but lifne kapara, but prior to sprinkling the blood, loy. So what is this? This is the case of a lav haba miklala say. It's by inference. The Torah says in a positive way, eat it after sprinkling the blood. By inference, we know you cannot eat it before you sprinkle the blood. It's a lav haba miklala say. And my conclusion is lavu. It's treated like a lav, and you'll get malchus. Now, we know the general rule is lav haba miklala say aseyu. If the lav is inferred from an asay, it actually has the status of an asay. You don't get malchus, as Gemara will say in a minute. So Moshe Rabbi has a question from this week's parsha we just read today, and we'll learn this week. V'chol behema mafreses parsa, any behema that is shasa, so that's split and all that. State process is maligata, and it's used called behema by behema oisa tachelu. By behema, that is what you should eat. No, it's only kosher animals. It has both signs. Both you can eat. Actually, an interesting hakir aside the Rogachover has. These 2 signs that enable you to eat the animal, is that just a sign? How do we know how to define what's a kosher animal? Or is that why they're kosher? Because these 2 signs are what makes it kosher. And he has a whole chakira there. So behema oiset techelu, behema acheret techelu. So from here I learn out that animal you should eat, but animals that don't have the 2 signs you cannot eat. So we glean a lav from this assay. Now the question is, if you're telling me that a lav habom miklala say is treated like a lav, why does the Torah then have to go along and then afterwards tell you, but zeh loy teichlu? What did you tell me about don't eat it? You already told me what I could eat, and I can infer from that what you're not allowed to eat. The Gemara V'ikidam, you're saying, zeh loy teichlu, why did the Torah have to spell out by the following you shouldn't eat? The Gemara said, you're right. Let's amend what he said. Eli'id marhachik. If he ate from mechatzas for zrika potter, you are potter. My timer, why are you potter? Because the Omakra, it says in Pasik, you should eat it only after you did the kapara. Kol heichel de karinabe, v'ochlo oisam shekupa behem, klima zol lo yachol kodesh. When that then when we learn that a zor should not eat because it's kodesh. Kol heichel de lo karinabe, v'ochlo oisam shekupa behem, but it's not possible that the kohen should eat. Then lo karinabe, the zor lo teichel. In other words, if you ate if a zor ate from a chatzav oshim before you sprinkled the blood, you don't have the isur of a zor lo yochel, because we don't say a lav habom miklala say lav. Now, the Gemara could have just said very simply. The flip side, the Gemara is of lav habom miklala say is a lav habom miklala say is a say. So the Gemara should have just said that it's a lav habom miklala say, and that's an asay. Simple. What's the Gemara to spell out this whole thing over here? It seems from the Gemara here that if it's before Zrika, not only you don't get a lav, you won't even get the asay. I told you all of these have an avera positive, and the Torah says, but now that we're dashing v'ochlo oisam kupa behem, only after the Zrika, then it's considered eating. So prior to that, not only you're not over the lav, you're not even over the asay, because the asay is v'ochlo oisam kupa behem, and only starts if a zor eats after that point. But before that point, maybe not only is not over the lois, he's not even over that say. That's what Gemara is saying here. Taking about further, going back to the Gemara we had before about what is the main thing that holds back Bikurim. Is it the Kriya, or is it the Hanocha placing for Mizbeach? The Gemara revisits that. But Bikurim, Hanoch Makav is ben. You should know that the most critical or the matir by Bikurim is placing it in front of the Mizbeach. Kriya Ema Akid, we want you to read, but if you don't read, it's not the end of the world. How can you say Rabbi Lazar said that? The same Rabbi Lazar, the same Rabbi said. Now remember, the mitzvah Bikurim is from Shavuos until Sukkot. If you bring Bikurim, you have to say all those Psukim in Pasha Kisaveh. But you can also bring it beyond. You have an extension of time beyond Sukkot till Chanukah, but then you no longer say the Kri, you no longer say the Psukim. So Rabbi Allah said, he freed Bikurim Kaim L'Chag. He set aside Bikurim before Sukkot, and you didn't have a chance to say the Psukim. But over, remember, that's the matter. What do you do now? Yirkavu, nothing you can do, it's stuck. But if you're telling me that Kriya is not Ma'akib, but the evidence of Psukim are right, so why Yirkavu? Why let it rot? Go ahead and bring it to the base of Mikdash, and don't say the Psukim. Doesn't that prove that the same Rabbi actually holds that Kriya is Ma'akib? My lab should you can't say the psukim. These are the kriya makir, but if you can tell me that kriya is not a big deal, from the chatchil b'di'ev doesn't matter. Why should it rot? Says the Gemara. This is the famous Rab Zeta that we quoted many times throughout Shas, based on Gemara Menachos. That is that because it says that the pot, if you have a pot up to 60 serenim, you can go ahead and bring whatever it is the mincha. But if it's 61 serenim, you need to bring in 2 pots. Why? Because if it's more than 60, it's very hard to stir it. It's very hard to stir it. So the Gemara asks a question, but who cares? If the din is, even if you don't stir it, it's still kosher mincha. So it comes one of and says, as long as you're able to stir it, it doesn't matter if you stir it or not. But the moment that you render it unable to be, that should be stirred, a pot of 60, if you put 61 in stirring, then it's possible. Then it's possible. Because it says mincha belula, it has to be able to be stirred. So the famous Abzeda, not Abzeda, call a roll if it's suitable to be stirred, even makev doesn't matter. But if it's not, bila makev is boy. Same thing here with Bikurim. You don't have to say the psukim, but the evidence is all right. But because after psukas, because you brought it before sukkahs, you already have a chiyuv to say the psukim, and after sukkahs you can no longer say it. Then the reason, because you don't have a choice. It's not like you brought it and you could have said the psukim, but I didn't. I can't say the thing I want to. Then be ilu makev is boy. Then it's not kosher. Gemara says further, Rabbi Acha bar Yaakov says the same thing Rabbi Lozer said name Rabbi Hoshe, that it's the Hanocha that's makib, but he did not say name Rabbi Hoshe. He said Master Rabbi Asa. He said it was Rabbi Asa and Rabbi who actually said the same thing. And then as a result of that, we have a contradiction what Rabbi Yechon said here and Rabbi Yechon said elsewhere. The Kashle Rabbi Yechon. Because you're saying over here that the main thing is the Hanoch. But if you didn't read it, doesn't matter. Rav Asi himself asked Rabbi Yechon, the very same Rav Asi, asked Rabbi Yechon, when a kohen are able to eat from the bikurim. He told him, those that you could read, once you read it. Which ain't really clear. If it's not roll to read, for example, you brought it after Sukkah. If you brought it after Sukkah, so it's not roll to read, then Mishra Panei Bais. Only once it saw the base of Mikdash, that's when he's allowed to be, since it's not the Psukim, and we don't need the Hanocha, it's enough to see Panei Bais. So you said before that the main thing is the Hanocha by the Mizbeach. And here, Rabbi Yechon Kuli told Avasi, it's the Kriya. Or with no Kriya, there is Panei Bais. Kashya, Kriya. I've got a contradiction there. And also Kashya, Hanocha. Here he says Hanocha doesn't matter. As soon as it sees the base of meter is good enough, I don't need Hanocha. And before he said Hanocha is Marketis. There's the Gemara, Kriya, Kashya, Horab, Shimon, Horabon. We had before, we had Akiva, we had Shimon. They hold that Kriya is the main thing. So Rabbi Yechon once said it is clear. And what do you call it? And Harabanan. So what he said before first was according to Rabbanan, the Hanocha. Sorry, Harabanan, that it's about Hanocha. But personally, when Avasi asked him a question, he told him, I hold the halacha is like Kriya's market. Not a contradiction, he's just giving different views, but his halacha was Kriya. Okay. Hanocha namdakasha. Horab Yehuda Harabanan. According to Rabbi Yehuda, Hanocha doesn't matter at all. And because you could argue you need both Hanocha and Kriya in order for the kohen to eat. So he says, no. We found this is one place he said, like Rabbi Yehuda, Hanocha doesn't matter at all. As soon as it sees the base of Mikdash, it's good enough. We don't need Hanocha or Kriya alone. And how do we know that? We'll see in a minute. And the other the Rabban hold Hanocha is Maki. What's this Rabbi Yehuda? The time it says in Pasik, it says I brought this the Bikurim, the Nachtoi, I put it down before Hashem. So it says Rabbi Yehuda. This it says twice Hanocha. It says later on that the kohen takes the basket from your hand. V'hinichai leaf name is so v'nicha twice. And now we have a general rule. In the Torah, generally, we don't have such a thing as a chatchila b'diavad. The Torah says something, that's how it always has to be. The only exception is kachim. At kachim, we have a rule, shana olav hakosev la'akiv. The Torah has to repeat it twice in order to say that even b'diavad, it's not good enough. But if the Torah only said it once, it means it's only the chatchila, not b'diavad. It says twice hanocha by Bikurim. But Rabbi Yehuda is going to take the first hanocha and use it for something else, which means he only leaves one hanocha for Bikurim. It means hanocha is not ma'akiv. What does he do with the first hanocha? Rabbi Yehuda, is a tnufa. It's that you have to wave by the korban. You have to wave, and the word hanocha means like Rashi brings lenochem alakim. Hashem did not by plishtim. He didn't take them along to plishtim. Means lead. It means leading to the four corners, which is what tunufa is. You wave it to the four different directions and up and down, like a lulav. Atom is a tufa. Maybe putting it down by his be'ech. It says another pasuk. Then another pasuk you should place it before Mizbech Hashem lekecha. The kohen takes it from your hand and places it. That's hanach already. What do I do with the first hanacha? Amani mekayim benachta zut tunufa. This means waving. So Rabbi Yehuda clearly holds only one pasuk for waving, which means only chatchil not b'diavad. Uman Tana the Polagolet of Yehuda, who argues with Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that Hanocha is Ma'akib. That's what we said before, it's the Rabbanon. Who's the Rabbanon? That's Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov. That's Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov. What's he? Tanya we learned. He said, where do you learn out the idea by Bikurim you have to wave it? That the kohen should take it from Yudecha, from your hand. From that part of the pasuk, not from the word v'hinichai, which we said means to lead in all directions. From the first part, the word miyodecha from your hand is extra. It's a gzeira shava. So how many times does it have a hanacha? Now you have two hanachas. That means shana l'kosel la'akiv, that you have to place it before the mizbech, before the kohen can eat from the bekurim. My time of Yaakov, ask learn out yad mishlam. Makes it shava yad. Here it says the lokach hakoyim yodecha, and we learn a pasuk by Shlomim. Ksiv hachol gomi demidecha. Ksiv, and by Shlomim it says yoda to Vienna, that he should bring his Iseh Hashem, the thing of Hashem, and there you wave, you take the breast and you take the and the fats and you put the kohen's hand and the kohen on his hand and you wave it back and forth. So we make the gzeira shava. Here's a coin of there's a coin, and Malahal and Bailim. And by the Shlomim it's the Bailim. By Bekurim it says, well, look, HaKoin had 10 me that the coin is taking it. And over there it says, you should bring it from the Yisrael, the Bailim. So who's the one who has to hold it? So we dashin. Okay, it says, Maniach Koyin Yodav Tachas de Bailim. The coin places his hand under the hand of the Bailim. And he waves it. Anyway, so bottom line is, Rabbi Yechon is not contradicting himself, he's giving different opinions. Bikurim. And we ask the same question again. Bikurim. When are we chayiv? Rashi learns the Gemara's question is a Yisrael. There's a few din about Bikurim. We just learned a kohen cannot eat from Bikurim unless you did the mate, which is either saying the psukim or you place it from his bech. A Yisrael is chayiv misa if he eats Bikurim once it became the status of Bikurim. So the question is, when is the Eid chayiv according to Rashi? Others say the question also is when is a kohen also able to that he can that the Bikurim becomes the kohen's like Truma. That means, what do you mean? When if a kohen eats Bikurim outside of Shalayim, is chayiv malchus. When is it considered chiv outside of Shalayim? Only once it has a status of Bikurim. So the question is that as well. When does it have the status of Bikurim as far as a kohen receiving malchus if it takes out of Shalayim? Does the Gemara know when? Once it sees the base Hamigdash, that is when we say that it has a status of Bikurim. Who does this follow? Bikurim. If mikzasim bechutz and mikzasim befnim. Let's say Bikurim, you put it by the base Hamikdash, and a part of it is inside the Beis Hamikdash, and part of it is outside the Beis Hamikdash. So that part which is outside of the Beis Hamikdash, you have to bring to the Beis Hamikdash. That part which is, let's say, I have a big basket. Part of it is outside the Beis Hamikdash. That's like chulin, the chol devreim. But the inside is treated like bikurim. So we see what makes it bikurim. Once it sees the Beis Hamikdash, that's when we say that Yisrael eats it from now on. He'll get malchus or chiyamisa. The kohen now takes it back outside of Yerushalayim. He'll get malchus for eating it. That's okay. We'll finish over here, and the Gemara continues the subject of the Kurim. We'll continue tomorrow, Mitzvah. Have a good walk, everybody.
Good